Of course, Donald Trump hasn't made public what his peace plan is exactly. And with the U.S. giving over $10 million a day to Israel, negotiating a peace plan makes sense. Or does it? Because he is taking $65 million and United Nations assistance off the table until the Palestinians return to peace talks. This creates a problem for refugees who may just as easily live in Jordan, Lebanon, or Syria, if not the Palestinian territories, who have not been offered a right to return or retribution under violations of Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, if not UN Security Council resolutions that were ignored. It's not just Jerusalem. In this debate, I will prove that because past offers were not negotiable, and why there is a reason to believe, that this specific offer at this time will be no better. I asked my opponent to prove there is a reason to believe the suggested talks will be worthwhile and productive with a reasonable outcome. Abbas told Kushner in July that he was willing to work with the United States on negotiations, but now calls the deal a slap of the century. And of course, I mentioned Jared Kushner because it's believed that Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law, is authoring the deal. And for that reason, I think it's safe to assume that the deal is pretty much probably the same thing that Netanyahu's peace deal is. And I'll get to that a little bit later, but because of the close relationship with Jared Kushner and Trump and Netanyahu, I think it's safe to believe that this deal will resemble Netanyahu's peace deal. So that's the basis of my case. I'll go ahead and pass the mic.
Hi. Okay. So first of all, you asked me what is the reason to believe there is anything to negotiate about. Well, as for Trump, what I do respect about him is that he actually respects me. He gives me the right to decide, me as an Israeli citizen who chose his or her government, a way to decide what our peace agreement is going to be. Because the previous presidents always used to determine some preconditions to negotiations. But as for now, Trump gives us the opportunity to decide what are the issues we're going to put on the table to negotiate about and what not. And this is what negotiations are about. We give the opportunity to Palestinians to give what is really important to them, and we negotiate about it. And this thing has never happened before, because there has always been some sort of a precondition that they used instead of taking it and going forward with the negotiations. They always use the preconditions as an excuse to not go to negotiations. We actually haven't talked for 20 years now. I mean, we try to talk. We try to go forward with with some sort of negotiations, which they just blocked, and they didn't go through with because of some very minor issues. As for 2000 and something, this was about Jerusalem as always. Then afterwards, there was about building in Judea and Samaria, and now it's about Jerusalem again. It's very minor. I mean, Jerusalem is not an issue at all. I mean, Jerusalem will always remain Israeli capital, at least half of it. But it always was negotiable. They didn't accept it, and that's why they didn't go through with the negotiations. And as for what you said about the right to return for all the refugees, this is not correct. In 1950 something, there was an offer for the refugees to return. It didn't go through just because Israel put this offer in return for the property of the Jewish refugees from Arab countries, which were about 850,000 Jewish refugees from Arab countries that didn't get their property back. from the Arab countries, and that's why it didn't go through. And this is the reason again for the whole thing. Don't have the right to return because they don't want to return the property of the Jewish refugees from Arab countries.
I think there are preconditions. Of course, Jerusalem. I'll get to Jerusalem in a second. But when we talk about the U.S. being an honest broker, the thing is that the U.S. It's the U.S. who puts this condition, and this is our Congress has done this. There is a bill that makes it law that the refugees would have a right to return in a Middle East peace deal. So that precondition exists, I think, regardless. And of course, in this speech the other day, Trump said that he took Jerusalem off the table. So he does have a precondition in there. And I'm suggesting, of course, that if Jared Kushner is writing the deal, and because of his close relationship with Netanyahu, and because of Trump's close relationship with Netanyahu, I think it's safe that it's what Netanyahu wants. Let me just run through your other 2 points real quick. I wasn't really sure if you were saying that Jerusalem is or isn't an issue. You were saying it doesn't matter, but it's the reason that they won't negotiate. I think the reason they won't negotiate is the refugees. I'm not. This one isn't really supposed to be Jerusalem again. I think when we just talk about Jerusalem, there's some things that don't get talked about, and that's why I thought it would be a good time to do this theme now. And of course, it's not 1950. And the authority I'm arguing actually isn't the UN. I'm arguing under the Fourth Geneva Convention. So those refugees, those Jewish refugees who were forced to enter into Israel, they would have a right to return or retribution under that same authority as well. And I don't have a problem with that because that's the authority that I'm arguing to. So I think that what Abbas is saying about this peace deal is that the Palestinians, of course, there's no right to return in the deal. And he's suggesting that, but he's also saying that it doesn't do some of the things that past deals did in regard to the resources and human rights. And it's very clear that what Netanyahu, what his statement is that the Palestinians, his deal would, the Palestinians would have a state. It would be a two-state solution, but it would actually be outside of the borders. So Israel will control the border, all the Palestinian territories from the river to the sea. And it's been suggested that where that would be is in the Sinai Peninsula between, well, it was supposed to be part of Egypt. It was part of Israel for a while. So, but it's basically a barren area. So it's suggested that this would be a two-state solution where the Palestinians would have a state outside of those borders. That's what Netanyahu wants. And then Saudi Arabia, they want a deal as well, and they want Abbas to go along with Trump. So I think it's safe to assume that that's what's going to happen.
I don't know what's going to happen because I've remembered myself watching these talks and all these offers, and nothing really went through. I don't think there is a plan. I don't think we ever spoke about it seriously with the Arabs because they usually didn't really put this on the table and didn't have talks and I don't think they ever wanted to negotiate. As what I think about their problem is that they're very the leaders of the Palestinians are benefited by this whole situation, and they want the money. They don't want this problem to be solved because they get a lot of money for this, and this is a different problem. But as for the refugees that you're talking about, as for now, it's not an option anymore because they're not going to return the property. I mean, it's about $300 billion as for now in property of the Jewish refugees that were forced to leave the Arab countries. I don't think any Arab country will agree to that. That's why we're not going to accept the Arab refugees from here, because this is sort of a exchange of populations that is not going to happen, because I mean the Arab countries are not going to return the Jewish property, and the Arabs ourselves don't accept their refugees. So this is sort of ridiculous. I don't see a reason why we should take the 850,000 Jews from Arab countries and assimilate them in our society, and they won't even get them out of the camps, which is not Israeli problem, and it's only their problem. I don't see how the number grew from about 520,000 refugees during the war to some millions, because it's not how things work. I mean, it's not, you can't be a son of a refugee. I'm a granddaughter of Jewish refugees from Ukraine who part of them were killed in Ukraine, and I'm not a refugee anymore. I mean, we just went through our lives and we're not refugees. So there's a very small number of refugees who are actually refugees from 1948. But yet we're not going to go with this because it's any deal that will happen will not be fair according to what they want. I mean, they want everything back, and they want to return with their families, with their grandchildren to this land. It's not going to happen, so that's not a reason to not negotiate.
Well, of course, the U.S. gives a lot of money to Israel, and it's what we give the Palestinians is really a drop in the bucket. And when we look at these refugees, they're dependent on the United States, and I think that's actually a problem because I I'm not really I think it's safe to say, I mean, with because 1948 was so long ago that you're right, they probably won't return. So I think that they deserve some sort of retribution, which where they would no longer be dependent on the U.S. or the UN, and that really falls under Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention. And if it specifically says, and it's non-binding, that if they can't return, that they would have to there would need to be a retribution. So I think that's the law that really needs to be applied here, and it's the best outcome because the U.S. shouldn't be paying for it either. It's silly that the U.S. has to keep paying for this, and I mean, of course, maybe they're not the same refugees from 1948, but they could be the third generation living on stacked above the second generation. These families literally are stacked above each other, and that's a problem. I think that, and this is what the Congress passed, is that the peace deal would have to solve this. And we can't just think about what's good for the U.S. or Israel. We do have to think about what's good for these outside parties, especially if we're talking about we're going to have to create a whole new state, a second state outside of of the river and the sea or whatever, outside of these borders as a two-state outcome, which is what Netanyahu has said. So yeah, we're giving a lot of money to we're giving Israel $20 million a day, or at least $10 million. $20 million would be a high number, but that's in U.S. aid, and the majority of this money, $45 million of it, is food assistance. And that's not so much that I think the U.S. should be giving anyone any aid, but this is an aid that's used for the Palestinians to harm Israel, and we're giving Israel aid to harm the Palestinians. I heard the debater in another debate say that the U.S. had cut off aid to Israel, but as part of the Iran deal, but we actually gave them more aid, and we actually only cut off assistance in the 2014 Gaza war. We actually just stopped giving them weapons. So that's the comparison here, is that we're funding one side on the conflict. And when you talk about taking the aid away, you have to really think about that. Like, what would be the outcome if they didn't have that food aid? Like, where are we forcing them to go? Like, what is a positive outcome of cutting aid to these refugees?
First of all, this aid doesn't go to the refugees. As you see, this aid serves the Hamas and the Palestinian leaders to try to destroy Israel in any possible way. It's not a productive money. They don't take it to build anything. They've gotten so much money since this whole conflict began, and since the whole problem caused to give them aid. Instead, they build tunnels. I'm sorry. to try to kill Israeli citizens. And I mean, if you compare, then at least Israel delivers the goods. We just, if we have some sort of a relationship, I'm sorry, with America, we have a very good relationship, and part of this money, as you talk about, is for buying back weapons only from the Americans. So this money goes back to you. I mean, it's very little compared to the whole, how do you call it, the product of Israel, the whole, I mean, this whole production and the economy. It's very little compared to what we have here. Compared to the Palestinians, that they actually take all the money. You don't see it back. Okay, you give it to aid to Palestinians, they don't get it. Who gets it is the Hamas and the Palestinian leaders. So what is as for the whole deal? I what I intended to say is, I don't know about where this what the plan is. I don't know what is actually going to be talked about whenever those peace talks are going to take place, if they ever going to take place, because we can only know it when the leaders talk and they actually bring all the options to the table. At this point, we can talk about what Netanyahu wants. Maybe he doesn't even want an agreement. I don't know what he wants. Maybe he wants to give them the Palestinian cities. But unless we talk and we see what the other side wants and what he agrees to, how much money he wants for that, what he wants for that, we can't talk. I mean, this is all about assumption, and neither me nor you and we know about what's going to happen. But what I think is that running away from negotiations is not going to help Abbas. Clearly not when he wants Trump's house to be demolished because he doesn't agree with him.
Of course, when we talk about Hamas and the tunnels, that's a separate government from Abbas. So that's one of the problems with Abbas doing the talks. If you want to talk about the PA, they've already recognized Israel. They did that as part of the Oslo Accords, which went nowhere. And I really we can't read because of this Jerusalem thing is the main reason, but also the refugees. I wasn't really sure where you were going with the product of Israel thing, and I agree that there should be a talk. The thing is, I'm not sure if it's productive, because it's not solving the refugee issue, which the United States has made it pretty clear that a peace plan would have to solve the refugee issue. And Abbas has met with Trump twice, and he's saying that this peace deal does not account for refugees, and of course Jerusalem is off the table, so he just doesn't feel like there's anything to negotiate for. And so those are, and of course, if Jared Kushner's writing the deal, he can't really be seen as an honest broker as well. And let's go back to September, and this is actually another precondition that Netanyahu has, because he has some preconditions as well. So that's another thing I should mention, is that Hamas and the PA would have to unify, and they're talking about doing that in September. But and I don't really have a problem with that. And the thing is that they want Hamas to totally disarm, which actually might not be a bad thing if they did do it. But I can understand why they might not be so willing at this time. Of course, the PA is completely non-violent, but I think really, well, the big problem with that is that they wouldn't have so much the same right to their own self-defense, to arms and that sort of thing, as Israeli citizens would. And of course, it's Kerry Kerry is suggesting that they go to the talks. I think they will. And what will happen is that they'll do the same thing they did to Kerry in 2014, because they did have a deal that they offered Kerry, and they have talked again, and that is that they would go back to the 1967 borders. And I'm not saying that's going to happen, but that's what Abbas is going to offer. So once you take the aid away, it's going back to my last speech. Like where is this going to go? What is the outcome, especially when the U.S. is giving military aid to the dominant force?
Okay, so for your question about the product of Israel, what I was saying is that we don't need money. I mean, if Donald Trump decides to keep paying, that means he gets something in return. Especially Donald Trump, because he doesn't give things for free. He's a businessman, and that's okay. I mean, that's very honorable, and it's okay. America first. I respect that, just the way he respects me. That's what you said about the two governments of Hamas and Abbas. Yeah, they need to unify, and they need to solve that problem and make peace between themselves, and then we can talk about making peace with us and with other countries. And as for Hamas, it's not. I mean, I know that they're not willing to be disarmed, but yeah, we're talking about a terrorist organization and not a legitimate army of a legitimate state. That's why we need that to be done, because they are not targeting. I mean, we don't have a reason to assume that once we have an agreement, some sort of agreement, just like the Oslo Agreement, we don't have a reason to assume that they're going to stop fighting, because they're not fighting over a Palestinian state. They are fighting over us being kicked out of this land, and they're talking about the whole territory of Israel, not only the West Bank and Gaza. That's why we don't have the reason to assume that they're going to stop. This is not a legitimate organization, and there is no reason for Israel to have any sort of agreements with this kind of state, just like America is not going to have negotiations with ISIS over any issues. We do not talk with terrorists. They are not worth of being talked with, and not when we have the power to force them to and bring us what. My son woke up. I'm sorry. I need to stop.